tuliishi kulima maji yetu, bivuko vyetu, bitu vyetu, masomo yetu ile tulikuwa nasomesha batoto, biko natufundisha batoto mudeni, hospitali, maternite yetu, soko yetu, kiwanja kia kabumbu yetu kile kenyewe batoto walikuwa nafanya nini nachezea, makanisa haina hako.
Kolwezi, the capital of the Lualaba province, is a mining city in the south of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. For over a century, mining has been at the center of everyday life here. But more recently, large industrial mining projects, extracting cobalt and copper, have been expanding at an incredibly rapid pace. To make way for these vast open-pit mines, residents are being forcibly evicted from their homes and farmland. In some cases, entire neighborhoods have quite literally been erased from the map. This dramatic expansion is, for the most part, being driven by the growing global demand for minerals that are essential to our transition away from fossil fuels and our ability to tackle the increasing severity of the climate crisis. In particular, cobalt, which is typically mined and processed alongside copper, is required in the manufacturing of lithium-ion rechargeable batteries that power everything from mobile devices to electric cars, and enable the storage of energy generated by renewables such as wind and solar power. This rare mineral exists in only a few places on the planet, one of which is right here, under the busy streets and farmlands of Kolwezi. Kolwezi is one of the biggest cities in the Central African Copper Belt that stretches from southern DRC to northern Zambia. While mining has shaped the city's landscape, livelihoods, and culture, bringing roads, housing, sanitation, and employment, it has also brought many harmful consequences. 100 years later, the global economy, with the electric car industry at the center, is undergoing a new transition that is heavily reliant on the DRC. And once again, foreign interests in pursuit of enormous financial gains are willfully ignoring the human suffering at the beginning of the supply chain, often with consent from the DRC government. In 2016, Amnesty International and AfroWatch documented how thousands of children, some as young as 8, were working in so-called artisanal mines, dug by informal workers with only basic hand tools. In these hazardous conditions, many were losing their lives to supply the cobalt that would eventually be sold to global tech brands and car manufacturers. Today, human rights violations in the artisanal mining sector have become the subject of much international attention, fueling debates about the viability of transitioning to renewable energy. For residents, the future security of their homes, communities, and livelihoods is a growing concern that has so far been ignored.
Wow.
We spoke to Edmond Moussens while walking through the rubble of the house that he had owned since 1994, but had been forced to dismantle after it was scheduled to be demolished by Comus, the operator of the advancing open-pit mine at the end of his street. After Moussens' attempts to obtain acceptable compensation failed, and the next time we went to see him, he was in the process of moving the remnants of his house, brick by brick, to the outskirts of Kolwezi, where he has started to rebuild. Mr. Moussens' story is typical of many of the mining-impacted residents we spoke to. In fact, the expansion of 3 out of the 4 mining projects we investigated had led to forced evictions conducted without the sufficient application of legal standards under Congolese and international human rights law. In cases where the mining companies resettled residents in substitute housing, evictees had to endure income loss, poor sanitation, or water and electricity shortages.
Il y avait des maisons ici, il y a des familles qui vivaient ici.
But sadly, this is only half of the story. Some of the people we spoke to had experienced far worse. In some of the cases we heard, forced evictions had been accompanied by horrific acts of violence. Mukumbi, a settlement to the northeast of Kolwezi, was razed to the ground, disappearing from satellite imagery entirely, to be replaced by a processing plant built by Shemaf, a mining operator owned by a private company based in Dubai. Kanini Maska, a former resident of Mukumbi, told us how her family, along with many former residents, were brutally evicted from their homes by the Congolese Republican Guard, a military unit in charge of protecting the country's president.
Sasa tunakuwa najiuliza, kumbe kunakuwa vita, kumbe kunakuwa nini? A partir ya pale unajua soda na bunduki na sheba villageois bakumashamba tunashikia boka. Tunatetemeka wakati biko nachoma manyumba.
We also spoke to Kabibi, whose real identity we were protecting. She told us she was brutally gang raped by 3 soldiers after she attempted to get to her crops, which had been blocked by military forces patrolling the nearby mine. The mine operator, Metalkol, is a subsidiary of the Kazakh company Eurasian Resources Group. Today, the manufacture of one electric vehicle requires just over 13 kilograms of cobalt. With production dramatically increasing, some experts are predicting a 6-fold rise in global demand for cobalt by 2040 from the electric vehicle industry alone. Vast quantities of valuable minerals will flow from the DRC, generating great wealth for the shareholders and executives of the mining companies. Meanwhile, residents' brave attempts to fight back and demand adequate compensation have, for the most part, been ignored. Now, more than ever, the world needs the DRC's rare mineral wealth to help build a zero-carbon future for all. But the rights of communities must not continue to be sacrificed in pursuit of this goal. Join us in calling on the DRC government, multinational mining companies, and their investors to end forced evictions at cobalt and copper industrial mines and put human rights first. On cobalt-powered mobile devices, the world is watching.